You know, motherhood can come in all guises and be very unexpectedly foisted upon you or taken away from you. And people are varying degrees of successful at it, or they're not at all. With the Flora fire, we've got Gaylin Rose, who no longer has any of her children because all 4 of her girls burned in the duplex in Flora, November 2016. She can't be too frightened of the landlord because she is suing, even though I think the suit against Whirlpool Appliances Corporation has been biffed. And word is that she's not cooperating with the investigators. She's not coming clean about who used to visit the home, who might have had access, who knew that her family lived upstairs there. Accelerant was found, even though Adam Randall made a press release statement before an investigation had even completed testing to say that there weren't any suspicious circumstances and maybe it was the wiring behind the fridge in the kitchen. So for a while Gaylin Rose went back to her job at the petrol station, but eventually she moved state. I think she's down in Florida. And there's been cries of racism. There's not a very large black population in the state of Carroll County, and Gaylin Rose and keyara, keyana, kerilee and kionnie, sorry if I have those names wrong, who are only aged from 11 to 5. We're definitely part of the minority. But there might be more to that even again. If it is arson, why? By whom? There are allegations, and it was brought to my attention by someone, and I wish I could remember who it was. There's allegations that Gaylin Rose herself might be the main person of interest, or somebody else that might be unexpected. I said the Flora home was a duplex, and the tenants who had taken the ground floor had recently moved out, and it was just Gaylin's family upstairs in this old timber house. If she was so concerned about safety and worried that the landlord wasn't making repairs and upkeep that he should, well, Gaylin Rose did have a responsibility to her own daughters to put in a smoke alarm herself and to check the batteries. And there's a lot of talk about where the fire actually started. Someone could have just gone up those side stairs. That door opens up into the kitchen. They could have even thrown a Molotov cocktail through a window, but then there would have been evidence of that. So how did Gaylin Rose get out and not her children? They're all upstairs. I don't know what the sleeping arrangements were, but all the girls were found dead of smoke inhalation in one room. And when Deputy Drew Yoder arrived on the scene from nearly 10 miles away, he found Gaylin Rose outside, and neighbours were reporting that the girls were screaming for their mother. A lot of questions arise because of the dynasties in Carroll County. In this instance, you're going to recognise names from the Flora fire event that are involved in the Delphi murders, Abby and Libby's double homicide case. You've got Randall as a name running through this, Dennis Randall and his wife Jean, a couple of scum who milk the town that they're supposed to be working in and serving. and Adam Randall, who was the volunteer fire station's chief, was only a block and a half away when the fire broke out. And why did Drew Yoder get there first? Before Josh Dissinger arrived from a block and a half away. Why did Josh take so long to get to this fire? And why did Adam Randall make the announcement before testing came back from laboratories about the fire being not suspicious? So Dissinger, he's lauded as this type of hero, and there's a new channel called, I think it's R&M, and he's highlighted that Dissinger seems to like being a hero, and we know that firefighters are often arsonists. Did he set the fire and not hurry there because he wanted there to be a real big blaze? Or did, as some people suggest, did it take long to get there because a black family, an African-American family were living in the home? You know, Anthony Greeno says that he got thrown in jail, tricked by Robert Ives, who's friends with Dennis Randall, into going in to interview him about the Flora fire, and instead he was arrested. Instead he was arrested, and he says that he was going to... Oh, that's terrible light. I'm sweaty, I'm hot, been walking. He says he was going to, put it out that Dennis Randall had said that niggers don't last long around here, meaning in his county. And when Anthony Greeno got released 36 days later, his phone was wiped. This is what he says. So go and watch True Crime Investigates Flora Fires videos. They're really informative, and they will outline the level of corruption in Carroll County. And of course Carter is there, Riley. It doesn't mean that they can't close an investigation if they want to, and it doesn't mean that Delphi murders won't be solved. It doesn't mean there's corruption in Delphi murders. But motherhood. So Gaylin Rose had motherhood taken away from her, and there's going to be hanging over her head suspicion because of the accelerant, and because she was out of the fire. But we haven't heard the 911 call, and Carroll County were outsourcing their 911 emergency service, and the company, they pay big bucks for the service to won't release the information. Now what would that 911 tell us? Another case where we haven't heard the 911 calls is the case of Summer Wells. We haven't heard Don Wells's call, and we haven't heard Candace Bly's call. So I don't know, that just kind of struck me. I realise that there is an administrative or an ownership issue with the 911 call for Gaylin Rose, but still, the fact that they're not released in Summer Wells's case is really intriguing, and I think it would be very telling. And it's just my personal belief that police have been onto Candace Wells as a person of interest for the entire time. And then that, brings us to, who was mothering, Libby. We've got Abby from a home where it's just her and her mom, and we've got Libby who's living in chaos, kind of, still in a home with her drug addict father who has lost custody. Her mother is hundreds of miles away. Libby was probably closer to Carrie than Kelsey was, but how influenced by Kelsey was Libby when it came to how she viewed her mother. And, as much as Becky Patty can be bringing up these girls, she's admitted herself recently, she was out of touch, and she was letting what other girls are allowed to do influence her choices for raising Kelsey and Libby, these girls who were already very vulnerable and who were relying on her. So her guilt is immense. And she was talking recently because of the yellow app, now called Yubo, which is also of interest in the Delphi murders case. The reason that police really need to hear from people who had contact with Anthony Shots on this is so that they can triangulate who was where when each device was accessing the Anthony Shots account on the various apps and contacting girls, so that they can pinpoint who it actually was, because they really need to know. Was it Tony? Was it Kegan Klein? Was it somebody else? Cousin, friend, just someone else in the network, someone surprising in town maybe. Police have said early on that they think he's local, someone that's lived there or lives there, someone who just knows the area, and that is very terrifying. But we've got all these three different visions of motherhood, haven't we? We've got motherhood by proxy, when a grandmother is in a position where she's the one financially stable to raise children, but her son, who's lost custody, is still living in the home and still bearing some responsibility, so it seems. And how does being a grandmother and not the mother affect how you raise children? Do you feel, did Becky Patty feel differently raising Kelsey and Libby, raising them more like doted on grandchildren than she would have if she had given birth to them? And is this where, this failure to monitor their safety has come in? And then how much has fallen to Kelsey, who is only 2 years older, a child herself at the time, and what sort of bad advice was Kelsey giving to Libby in lieu of good advice that might have been able to come from Becky Patty had she been paying more attention? That is going to haunt Becky Patty for the rest of her life. Mistakes are made. We're all fallible. And sometimes mistakes, they just, by happenstance, sometimes they just end up being fatal. I know that, because of the book being read at the moment, Promise Not to Tell, there's going to be all sorts of questions, particularly around Kelsey. Maybe setting up a meeting, tricking Bridge Guy into thinking Kelsey's going, but sending her sister instead. Giving her clothing item. I mean, that's ridiculous, because that would mean that Kelsey had contact in person with Bridge Guy, and he would be familiar with her clothes and maybe mistake her for her sister just because her sister was wearing a jacket of hers. That doesn't make sense. We can't get hysterical here. Things might be interesting to ponder and speculate, but I'm very concerned that, after this little lull while this book is being read, there's a little lull, but it's kind of like we're in the eye of the storm, because it's going to open up a whole nother can of worms for all this further pontificating and laying of blame. Admittedly though, I'm very curious about a lot of what Kelsey has said, but I do think no matter what happens, she's a very traumatized young girl and always has been. Indeed, she couldn't sleep on her own for 6 months, and she'd be frightened to go out to her own car after work for months and months. She'll never be the same. And what struck me about The Shack, the movie and the book, is that the sister, the older sister of the girl who was murdered in The Shack, felt guilt for so long. Guilt because she took her father's attention away for a moment with her own situation. She was out on the lake and the kayak capsized. So her father leaves the little girl in the camping spot and runs out. Sure, I'd love to know what Tara's ex-husband Josh meant when he said, the girls were found in a cabin in the woods, because it's curious, but he probably deleted it just because he realised it was wrong. And maybe that's just what he heard. He heard they were found, they were in the woods. Maybe someone said something that made him think it was a cabin. We don't know. The Chinese whispers, okay? We don't know. But do we jump on everything as suspicious and, blame people who are suffering immensely? We just have to trust Carter. In my dark moments, when I think, of that familial guilt, I do think of the saying, keep your enemies closer. Superintendent Carter has really stuck with the German family quite closely, and particularly Kelsey. In that press conference in 2019 where they showed that new picture, which would have been devastating to the family, because they would have felt like, are they back at square one? Do the police really know nothing what is going on? But they actually sent people to be with Kelsey, ostensibly to comfort her and just give her moral support, but perhaps to gauge her reaction, right? I don't know. People talk about Cody Patty, the cruelest, most stupid people say that Libby was pregnant, or, thinking she's pregnant. She's got tears in her eyes and fingers crossed because she doesn't want to be pregnant, and that it's Cody Patty's. Well, how long was Cody Patty away in prison? Had he only been away for a month? Had he just gotten back after a really brief time? Or was he away for several months? He'd returned on the Thursday. I know there's so much differing information about where he was. Was he at work? Was he with mates? Was he hunting? Was he, doing any number of activities? This is interesting. It's all very curious, but one thing that I just trust is that law enforcement know. I just trust that. I trust that they have questioned Shane Evans, right? About where he was. He knows exactly what people are angling at when they ring him and ask him for those minutes. He could have been having an affair. He could have been skiving, doing any number of things. He did turn up at the search at 8:30. Abby's uncle was at the Flora fire as a responder, and he was also in the search at Delphi. Yeah. Anyway, this wasn't the chat that I intended to have with you about it all. I intended to talk a lot differently, but I've been tired. Finding time and the energy has been really hard, and it's actually quite hard to sit and talk to yourself and talk cohesively for an hour and, you know, bring up all your points. It's not like even being on a live or just having a conversation. So look, you know, this channel, I'm a viewer who makes videos. I'm a viewer who talks to herself, talks things out, things that tweak my interest. In this case, it was Carter and I think, is it Holman? What's his name? Both saying that they have a very strong person of interest in the fires. Now, if it's true, Gaylin Rose isn't being very forthcoming. She might be a person of interest, but is Dissinger also a person of interest? The firefighter who has this history of heroism, right? I don't know. But Drew Yoder says he saved him. Drew Yoder will be forever scarred mentally as well as physically. He's got burned up hands from going in and trying to save those girls. He went in 3 times into the burning inferno. You know, did someone know that they were home? Did they think the house was empty? But why start the fire upstairs? You know, why start the fire upstairs and not downstairs? And how did Gaylin, she says she woke up to smell it. Why didn't she get her children out? How was it burning so badly that she couldn't just get her children out, but she got herself out, maybe having to go through the kitchen to do so? Why wasn't she in there with her children? I don't know. Did she do what every other mother would do and just failed? She was saying outside, you know, I failed. Yeah, just pondering the different types of motherhood. I mean, Candice Blythe is simply not a mother. So she's not a mother, and she's lost all of her children, all the children she's ever had, and she's never going to get the boys back. And I believe she knows what happened to her little girl. And we've got, you know, Becky. Was she an enabler? Was she just out of her depth? Did she just not realize that she had to pay more attention? She just out of touch, like she said. You know, she says, I was aware that they had this music app that they would do. All the girls were doing it. Libby was into so much more, wasn't she? TikTok, which is clearly where predators roam. She was on many platforms and using Snapchat. And who was teaching her this? Other girls at school or her older sister? You know, I've pondered before, did Kelsey actually have direct contact with Anthony Shots? And did she send photos? Is that what she deleted? I don't know. But the timing's a bit funny, because if Kelsey learned of Anthony Shots at a sleepover, and this is why she had a falling out, that sleepover, had that just happened? Had that happened after the phone reset? You know, it would have had to happen before the phone reset, wouldn't it? Gosh, the lighting's terrible, isn't it? I'm just looking so terrible. I've actually got to go. I'm going into a movie now. I'll speak to you later.